every year, on the 15th of March, the world celebrates Consumer Rights Day. It's aimed at raising awareness and safe practices that ensure consumers are treated fairly. The Office of the Consumer Goods Services Ombud has now been established to deal with complaints. In fact, Ombudsman Magauta Mphahlele joins us now for more on the importance of a day like today. Magauta, it's great to have you with us on the program, and perhaps this Consumer Rights Day is one of the most important that we've had in recent years, just given the kind of pressure on consumers at the moment.
Yes, that is true. Thank you very much.
So what do you reckon, consumers need to be aware of in general, insofar as their rights are concerned? Give us your top 2 regulations that I should know as a consumer.
Yeah, in South Africa we have various laws that regulate consumer issues, both in the financial services sector and generally in consumer goods and services. We have the National Credit Act, we have laws that regulate insurance and other financial services, and of course we have the National Credit Act in the context of what you've said, that consumers are under a lot of pressure. So, I will highlight those 2 laws, the National Credit Act, because it regulates what should happen if you are over-indebted, and the Consumer Protection Act, which regulates what happens if you buy goods or services and those transactions go wrong or goods or services are not delivered as promised.
In your experience, please continue.
No, it's fine. You can ask.
In your experience, consumers in South Africa, are they well versed insofar as their rights are concerned, or do you reckon it's a case of when I have an issue that I need to deal with as a consumer, that's when I do research about what's important for me to know?
Yeah, it looks like that is what is happening because, consumers at the point of purchasing a product or taking credit, they are interested in the product or the credit that is being advanced to them. Later, when issues arise, then they would start searching and saying, what is my right? We would prefer that upfront. And with various ombudsmen and regulators, we do a lot of consumer education. But I am seeing, especially on social media, because we are active on social media, that we do see some activism going on where consumers know that there is the CGSO. They tag us when they are not happy with suppliers. But we would want to see more activism and consumers actually understanding and applying their rights before they finalize transactions, because sometimes transactions go wrong, credit go wrong, because consumers did not look out for certain things when they were entering into those transactions. But based on the number of complaints that we are receiving, I think consumers are aware. And anyway, suppliers are required by law to also make consumers aware of their rights in case they are not able to resolve disputes between themselves.
Yeah. In fact, that was my next question to you. A day like today is not only important for consumers, but for suppliers as well in terms of holding them accountable.
Yes, and that's where I come from, to say a lot of time we focus on consumers to say you must understand your rights, but they don't have the capacity and the resources to know all these laws. Suppliers are different. They have internal legal divisions that make sure that they comply with the law. So they also have a responsibility to educate consumers about their rights and responsibilities. And at the point of transactions, most of the laws require them to explain the terms and conditions and not to hide them in some corner, so that at the end of the day, the consumer must know what they are signing or what type of transaction they are entering into and what the implications are.
Right. Let's talk a bit more about the National Credit Act, because you've cited this as one of the more important pieces of legislation insofar as the protection of consumers is concerned. So it's meant to protect a consumer that enters into a credit agreement with a credit provider. How does it do that, Magauta? And, are there instances where I'm applying for credit and perhaps I should not be granted that credit based on my level of over-indebtedness, and yet I am granted that credit anyway.
Yeah, we do have those instances. The National Credit Act protects you from reckless lending as a consumer, but you have to be honest in what you disclose to the credit provider. So credit providers are required to do an affordability assessment to look at your income and expenses. They are required to make sure that you understand the risks and obligations of taking out that credit agreement. Interest rates are regulated, so they cannot charge you anything. They are required to be registered with the National Credit Regulator. So anyone who's not registered should not be advancing credit. That would be considered a null and void contract. The other important thing they are required to do before they grant you credit is to assess your level of over-indebtedness, which requires them to check your credit bureau report. But we do find in some instances that the affordability assessments are not done correctly, and the over-indebtedness in terms of the credit bureau report is not checked. But we also have instances where the consumers themselves, sometimes in cahoots with the person that is doing the assessment, they underdeclare their expenses. So someone who has a household of 5 people will say, no, I only buy groceries for 500. Clearly that is not sustainable, and those things do happen. But generally, credit providers, especially the bigger ones, we have a problem with your smaller unregistered ones, your mashonisas, that don't do any affordability assessments at all. They will just come and take your ID and your bank card and break your door down if you don't pay them. So consumers must be aware that they must only borrow from registered credit providers. And when you go to the website of the National Credit Regulator, you will find a list of registered credit providers. And do a budget, and don't overborrow, because a lot of the time we overborrow. Like right now, we were in a low interest environment. We are not thinking that in 6 months' time, and that has started, the Reserve Bank will raise interest rates. That means my monthly installment will increase. Have you factored in? And bad things do happen. A lot of the time, it's not also because consumers are bad. It's because, like you see, I mean, we had the pandemic, people lost their jobs, incomes were reduced. So even if you had saved for a year, that money is gone. But there are options that you can exercise in terms of the National Credit Act. Don't hide. A lot of the time, people don't hide.
Yeah.
They hide and they are afraid to say, I have a problem, and they let things get out of hand and in the legal space.
So, Magauta, you've already given us some valuable information and tips insofar as consumer rights is concerned. But on a day like today, are there any specific programs that the Consumer Goods and Services Ombud does undertake to ensure that there is more information available for consumers?
Well, we don't only do it this day. Today we are in KwaZulu-Natal supporting the KwaZulu-Natal government that is launching the Consumer Tribunal in this province, which is very important because remember, the Consumer Protection Act provides for alternative dispute resolution, which means out-of-court resolution of disputes, and tribunals, and we do have a national one, are free to consumers. So instead of going to court, you have the option to go to a tribunal. And today that is being launched in KwaZulu-Natal. But generally, we do on a daily basis reach out to consumers through various platforms, television, radio, social media, to educate them about their rights and obligations. So it's not only today, but it's something that we do continuously. But today we're just celebrating. Actually, the Consumer Protection Act comes from this system of international consumer rights. South Africa has taken those international consumer rights and have made them law and have established the institutions to enforce and to provide redress to consumers, your ombuds, your national consumer commissions, your national credit regulators. Other countries in Africa especially don't have the type of consumer protection regime that we have in South Africa, which is working. And consumers must know about them and they must use these institutions.
It's up to consumers as well to educate themselves. Magauta Mphahlele, let me thank you for your time this morning on this 15th of March, World Consumer Rights Day. That's the Ombudsman with the Consumer Goods and Services.